All right. So here's the formal definition of active recall. Active recall is actively remembering information instead of just passively reading it or even just passively reading while highlighting it. When your brain works hard to retrieve a fact, it helps form a long-term memory. Taking a quiz or filling in a blank uses active recall. But how effective is it? How effective is active recall really in comparison to just rereading or highlighting? Well, thankfully, some people tested it. In 2011, there was an experiment where they had some of the subjects, well, they had all the subjects prepare for a test where they had to memorize a bunch of stuff. One of the groups only read the stuff once, and then later on, they took a test on it. They scored about 30% retention on the test, so they'd forgotten most of it, scored about 30%. Then there was the group over here that, sorry, let me move this around. Then there was the group over here that read it 4 times. They reread the material 4 times, and then they took the test and they did better. They got 50%. But the final group, instead of rereading the material to study, they just took a little quiz once after they studied it. They got 70% on the test. Now, as teachers, we might look at these scores and say, well, I don't want my students to get 70%, but we have to remember this wasn't a test in school. This was an experiment. So they didn't want anyone to really get 100%. They intentionally made it difficult. So we can look at these, and it really speaks for itself. Reading the material once wasn't very effective, but even rereading it 4 times was much, much less effective than just taking a little quiz immediately after reading and then taking the real test later. 70% rather than 50%. And it probably took less time to do a self-test rather than rereading 4 times. So it's faster, it's far, far more effective. But we may say we don't want our students to just memorize junk, right? Like in psychology, we often refer to learning and forming memories as basically the same. But as teachers, we know that memorizing isn't really the name of the game, right? We want students to not only memorize information, but to really learn at a deeper level. Thankfully, somebody thought of that and they tested it. So in this experiment, or rather a more complicated series of graphs, but they tested 2 types of learning. They tested factual learning, so, memorizing facts and stuff. And then they tested conceptual learning, where the subject had to do that higher level thinking, where, they would have to use what they learned to solve new problems, or they would have to use what they learned and transfer it to a new context. So that's the kind of learning that we like as teachers, right? We like, it's nice when they memorize stuff, but it's even nicer when they get that deeper conceptual learning. So does active recall help with real deep conceptual learning? Well, we can look at the graph and kind of figure it out ourselves, right? The white bar shows the subject who restudied, who reread the passages, just rereading it multiple times. The gray bars show the subjects who took a quiz after learning before they then took the real test later. There's an enormous difference. When we look at the factual stuff, there's obviously it goes about 27% here to 76%. But for the conceptual deeper learning, it nearly doubled. Here we've got 39% that went up to 70%. Here we've got 36% went up to 60, 64%. So almost, but not quite doubling the scores just by using active recall, just by giving the students a little quiz right after they read. So to me, this is great because it means active recall, it's not just good for memorizing. I mean, it's real good for memorizing, but it's also extremely, extremely effective for real deep learning. So again, I mean, I think it really speaks for itself looking at these graphs. All right, so now I'm going to pause. Well, actually, no, I can't pause. You're on your computer. You are going to pause and do a brain dump. Take 3 minutes or so and write down everything you remember from today's class so far. So pause this video, write down every single thing that you've learned today so far. This is going to be your summary. This is going to be your notes. So make it detailed. Pause the video. I'll wait. Okay, I hope you did your brain dump. And as you may have experienced, sometimes you kind of hit a wall and you're like, oh, I can't remember anything. But if you're patient with yourself and you wait, then I find in my experience, it's like the floodgates open and everything else, I suddenly remember it. So I tell my students this as well. You know, I usually have them write for 5 minutes nonstop. And I say, you know, if you can't remember, that's okay. Don't check your email. Just let the information come in, and it usually will. Okay, so another really, really effective technique that you can use right now, if you pause the video in a sec, is turning notes into an easy DIY study guide. So as we know, active recall is so much better than just rereading our notes. So a brain dump is a great way to force your brain to recall the information. But we can take it a step further and then turn those brain dump notes into a study guide that you can study the next day. So here's how we do it. I just turn them into fill in the blanks. I have my students do that. So let's say your first note is active recall means testing yourself to help learn. Okay, well, your study guide can just say blank recall means testing yourself to help learn. That's it. You just turn your word into a blank. That's so easy. And I find that students of, well, I work with middle and high school mostly. So middle and high school students are pretty able to do this when you demonstrate it. It might seem at first like, oh, that's way too easy. But I will tell you from experience that even the students who feel like, oh, it's way too easy, when they then try to solve their study guides a week later, it's like they've never seen it before in their lives. They're like, what recall? Oh no, I learned that. I have no idea, which is the whole point of a study guide. Even though when you're writing it, it seems so obvious, it really isn't. And we can use this for all kinds of subjects, which is why I love it so much. We can use it for psychology, like we're doing now. We can use it for education, like we're doing now. You can use it for math. You can use it for English, foreign language, history, anything. So a math example would be use the elimination method to solve systems of equations. Well, that could turn into use the blank method to solve blank of equations. And the percent change equation, well, we can change it up. We could put the percent change equals blank, and then students would have to write in the answers. And again, this is something that students can do completely on their own. And I love it because not only can they then solve their own study guides, they can also quiz each other. And this is something I often do at the beginning of class. I'll have a student as the quiz master. And so for homework, they'll make a study guide. And then the next class, they'll quiz the class. So the class starts with a brief summary and review of whatever they did for homework. And it's also kind of fun for the students as well. Sometimes they like to make their own Kahoots even and go a little nuts with that. So pause the video now and try this out. Turn your brain dump that you just wrote into a study guide. Do not share them in chat. We do not have chat today. So pause the video, go ahead and do that, and then we will continue.